Hey, it's me, Vicki Marie. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on wherever you are in the world, in this crazy world that we live in. On the 15th of July in 1992, 24-year-old Rachel Nickell, the lady that you can see in the top left hand of this video, decided to go for a walk with her little rescue dog, Molly, and her 2-year-old son, Alex. So let's have a little look. Let's have a bigger look at Rachel. This is Rachel Nickell. This is Rachel with her little dog, Molly. Molly was a rescue dog. And I think that is on Wimbledon Common. I'm going to tell you about Wimbledon Common in a moment. This is Rachel and her son Alex when they were on holiday. And this is Rachel with her husband and her son Alex when he was a baby. So on that fateful day, Rachel decided, as she did probably every day, if not most days, to go for a walk on Wimbledon Common with her son and her little dog. So let's have a look at Wimbledon Common, where it is. So most of you will know Wimbledon from the tennis. You know, Wimbledon is in the UK, near to London. And as I say, most people, wherever they are in the world, will know of Wimbledon because it's been made famous because of tennis. Now in Wimbledon, there's a couple of sort of what we call in the UK commons, which are a bit like nature trails that you might call in other countries. And it's like a common is like a big park. Be a lot of greenery there, woods, etc. There might be a lake, there might be a pond, depending on how big the common is. And Wimbledon Common is a big common. And they're places where people go to walk their dogs, to walk. There might be tennis courts there. They might go sailing there. And they're like a relief, if you like, from cities, you know, which can be little bit ugly, can't they, with their buildings, etc. And these commons, they're a welcome relief, a respite from urban life. You know, a little bit of open air, countryside, greenery, etc. And these should be places that women, men, anyone should be able to go and walk safely with their dogs or without their dogs, just with their children. Now, unfortunately, this was not the case for poor Rachel that day. Now, I'm sure most of you know where London is in the UK, just to give you an idea of where this happened in England. And of course, Wimbledon is also famous for the Wombles, Wimbledon Common. So she decided to go for a walk with her little rescue dog, Molly, her 2-year-old son. And as I say, Wimbledon Common, a beautiful park in southwest London. Rachel referred to the three of them as her little pack. That was how she referred to them. So, Wimbledon Common is a place popular with locals for dog walking, general leisure activities, and is deemed safe. Rachel had no idea that she was about to meet evil that day. In a secluded area of the common, Rachel was attacked. She was violated, and she was stabbed 49 times. And this resulted at her death at the scene. So the attacker fled, leaving Alex, her son, physically unharmed. A passerby found him clinging to his mother's blood-soaked body, repeating the words, "Wake up, Mummy," with a piece of paper stuck to her forehead as a bandage. Alex said that after his mother had been attacked, he said to her 3 times, "Wake up, Mummy," before realizing that she was gone and not playing. He then walked into a clearing on the common where people saw that he was covered in blood and therefore discovered his mother's body. This case immediately captured public attention. Rachel was young, attractive. She was doing the most normal thing you could imagine, walking with her dog and her young son in the local park. She should have been safe. The public were outraged and police were under immense pressure to find the killer. No one felt safe, but it took 16 years before Rachel's killer was finally brought to justice. Let's chat. So, first of all, just before I get started with this story, I'd just like to say thank you to all my subscribers. If you're not subscribed yet, please consider subscribing or liking the video. It's completely free. And I want to say a special thank you to my members. We have members live every Tuesday and Thursday. So why not become a member? And then you can join in our live streams twice a week. Now then, it took 16 years, as I say, before this killer was finally caught. And you know what? In that time, he had also killed Samantha Bisset and her 4-year-old daughter, Jazmine. You know, it makes you wonder that if he would have been caught more quickly, could the police have acted more quickly? It felt like they took a long time to find this killer. So this is Samantha and Jazmine, who were killed by the same man the following year, well, about 17 months later. Both of them killed. In their home nearby where this had happened. Now, I'll be doing a deep dive on their particular case in the future, but today we're talking about Rachel in particular. He was also suspected of many other victims, some of which I'm going to mention. Now, the officers of the Metropolitan Police, the London Metropolitan Police, they undertook this investigation. They were under so much pressure. The public, this is a case, you know how some cases capture the public's imagination more than others, and Rachel Nickell's case was one of those. Even though we didn't really have social media at the time like we do now, it wasn't TikTok. I think there probably was YouTube, but it wasn't as popular as it is now. So most of this case will have filtered through the mainstream media as opposed to social media. But the public, well, and apart from anything else, they felt unsafe. The public in the local area felt like they couldn't take their dogs for a walk, etc., because they did not feel safe. And the ironic thing is that even later, when maybe they did feel safe because they thought someone had been apprehended for this case, it was the wrong person. Anyway, so the police were under really high pressure to find the perpetrator because of the press coverage and the public outrage. 32 men were questioned in connection with this murder. And very quickly, they targeted a man called Colin Stagg. He was one of the men that was interviewed in connection, and they focused in on Colin really quite quickly. And as we'll see, probably a little bit too quickly, the police were convinced this was their man. Now, Colin was a local man from Roehampton, and he was known to walk his dog on that common. He fitted an offender profile that they had commissioned of the killer. So they designed a covert operation, codenamed Operation Edsel, to see whether he would eliminate or implicate himself. Effectively, this was what is now known as a honeytrap. So for several months, an undercover policewoman feigned a romantic interest in Stagg with the aim of getting him to confess to Rachel's murder. She got to know him by posing as a friend of a woman with whom he used to be in contact with via a Lonely Hearts column. So it just shows you, even before social media, they could always find a way. Over 5 months, she attempted to obtain information from him by feigning a romantic interest, meeting up with him, speaking to him on the phone, and exchanging letters about sexual fantasies. They met up in Hyde Park and spoke. She encouraged him to speak about the Rachel Nickell homicide. He later claimed he only played along with the topic because he wanted to pursue the romance. So it seems like Colin Stagg, maybe he was a little bit of a lonely man, a little bit of a fantasizer, a little bit of a Walter Mitty character. And this policewoman played on all that. You know, I suppose if he would have been turned out to have been the murderer, we'd probably be saying, oh, good that they did that. But it was a little bit like there was no real evidence to connect Colin with the murder, only this profile. There was no really other corroborating evidence. And the police focused in on him so early on and was so determined that it was him that, as we'll see later, the real killer was just ignored, forgotten, despite there being warning signs, even from the real killer, from his own mother, had contacted the police about him. These things were ignored. They laser focused in on Colin, and this woman, policewoman, was encouraged to talk to him, getting to talk about sexual fantasies of violence, etc. He went along with it all, but he said later it was just because he wanted to keep the romance going. He was quite a sad man, really. Anyway, but he never confessed to the killing. So even though he went along, with the fantasies, etc., he never actually confessed to the killing. So at his trial, a taped don't know if it ever actually came to a trial because the judge dismissed it, but there were tapes of their conversations, and one was released between the police officer and him, in which she claimed, so she was sort of leading him, that she liked hurting people. So she was trying to get him to admit that he liked hurting people too. And he said, "Please explain. I live a quiet life. If I've disappointed you, please don't dump me. Nothing like this has ever happened to me before." Because although he wasn't a person really who was into violent fantasies, he must have thought it was his Christmas come early when, I presume she was an attractive woman. An attractive policewoman goes out of her way to, well, he doesn't know she's a policewoman. An attractive woman goes out of her way to encourage him to talk about fantasies, etc., and make him believe, that he's in with a chance with her, because it doesn't seem that he was a very successful guy with the ladies. And he probably, you can just sort of imagine he was probably thinking, oh, she's a bit weird, but oh my God, this is brilliant, because she's, encouraging him to talk about sex, etc. So he went along with it so far, but he specifically said, "Nothing like this has ever happened to me before. Please explain. I live a quiet life, etc." And then when she went on to say, "If only you had done the Wimbledon Common murder, if only you had killed her." I mean, when we look, hearing about that now, you think, my God, how was she ever even allowed to do it? It's just too blatantly leading someone on, isn't it? Anyway, if only you would have killed her, it would be all right. That's what she said to him. But he replied, "I'm terribly sorry, but I haven't." So even though she encouraged him to confess, sort of really making it clear that she didn't mind. In fact, if anything, she found it exciting, that he may have murdered Rachel. He still did not confess. So, however, ultimately, even though he didn't ever confess, he was arrested in August 1993. And a year later, at his trial at the Old Bailey, the judge excluded the entrapment evidence. So the prosecution withdrew its case because that's all they had, and Colin Stagg was acquitted for the crime. However, Rachel's killer had still not been caught, and her case went cold. Now, some of the police afterwards still insisted that they still thought it was Colin Stagg that had done it. So they were so blinded by the fact that they thought it was Colin Stagg, they didn't take a look around them at other obvious alternatives. So Rachel's case went cold. But then in 2002, with more advanced forensic techniques, the case was reopened. Now, this that I'm going to read out to you now is from the forensicaccess.co.uk website. This is their own account of what happened from 2002. In 2002, when Forensic Alliance became involved in the cold case investigation into Rachel's murder, I think I'm going to put the picture of Rachel up because she's much nicer to look at, to be honest, than me. And it's important to look at her, isn't it? There you go. So while I read this out to you, this is the lady. This is Rachel. I say the lady, she was a young girl, really. She was only in her early 20s. A mother, a wife. Colin Stagg was arrested, but with no evidence. Anyway, in 2002, when Forensic Alliance became involved in the cold case investigation into Rachel's murder, which was given the code name Operation Edsel, Angela Gallup assigned Roy Green to the case, assisted by several colleagues. Mike Gorn focused on the chemistry aspects of the case, while Claire Lowry was responsible for hairs and textile fibres. Andy MacDonald took care of DNA analysis, and April Robson was appointed lead forensic examiner. The first thing we did was look at the items of clothing that had been retrieved from her and from her 2-year-old son, Alex. Next, we examined the body samples and the tapings taken from her body. Semen is traditionally a good source of DNA. But since the previous scientific team had not found any semen on Rachel's body, we anticipated that we'd be looking for smaller traces. Then, in phase 3, we looked at various items that had been collected from the crime scene on Wimbledon Common and from some potential suspects. Later on, we added a 4th phase, which involved looking more closely at the debris the FSS had gathered from key items. So, to assist with the first phase of our investigation, the search for foreign DNA that could have come from Rachel's attacker, Roy set up a reconstruction experiment in the laboratory. The aim was to try and identify the specific areas of Rachel's clothes that were most likely to have been handled by her attacker. Another scientist put on clothes over a scene suit that was similar to the clothes Rachel had been wearing at the time of her attack. Then Roy, acting as the attacker and with black powder applied to his hands, pulled and pushed them until they resembled the distribution of Rachel's clothing when her body was discovered. Residues of black powder indicated where contact had been greatest, and therefore where on her clothes we should focus our attention. Then we started work on phase 2, which was when we found a way into the case. When the previous scientific teams had tested the tapings from Rachel's body, they'd used a DNA profiling test called low copy number, LCN. LCN is a variation on the standard profiling used at that time that works by multiplying or amplifying relevant parts in small amounts of DNA until there is enough present to analyze. With LCN, 34 cycles of amplification were used, as opposed to 28 within the standard test. Our team took a different approach. We always began with the standard 28 cycle at that time, so that we had a baseline of what our extracts contained in the way of DNA. We only progressed to LCN test if we thought it was appropriate. And when we looked at the tapings from the previous tests, what we found using the standard method of 28 cycles was a mixed profile. The major component appeared to be from Rachel herself, while some minor components were from a male. When we then tested the same extract using a 34 cycle technique, the equivalent of the previous test, it was clear that our reaction was over amplified, leading to an excess of DNA and no result. But intrigued by the tiny amount of male DNA, we went back to the original intimate tapings and resampled them, creating our own extracts. We then repeated the same testing as before. With some of the tapings, we got a full profile from Rachel, and although there was something else there, it was not confirmed by the duplicate test. With other tapings, however, even at 28 cycles, we were getting a major result from Rachel and a minor result from the male DNA. But not yet enough to identify who it might have originated from. So we decided this was the ideal opportunity to take a different approach, cleaning up and concentrating our sample extracts, trying to eliminate as much extraneous material, such as salts and impurities, as possible, because they can inhibit DNA analysis. We then tweaked the running conditions on our machines to optimize the process. Our colleagues at Orchid Cellmark undertook the bulk of this work, with Roy making sure it was done as quickly as possible because we needed to continue to make progress with this case. In the end, it took the better part of 2 years. 2 years. Andy MacDonald then carried out some other DNA tests on our extracts from the intimate tapings in an effort to obtain as much information from them as possible. By the end of it all, we had plenty of information on which to mount a search of the National DNA Database. Now, Roy Green had noticed at quite an early stage of the investigation there were similarities between the modus operandi, MO, that is a criminal's pattern of behaviour or his way of committing a crime, and that of a man called Robert Napper. Napper had been incarcerated in Broadmoor Hospital, a mental hospital, very high security, where the Yorkshire Ripper was, since 1995 for the murder of another young woman and her 4-year-old daughter. When the DNA was extracted from the samples in our investigation was put on the National DNA Database, he came up as a match. Then we began to search for more links. One of the places we looked was on some of Napper's possessions that had remained untouched at Broadmoor since they'd been returned to him by police a few years earlier. Police investigators had apparently been particularly interested in a red-painted toolbox about which Napper was very protective. It was of further interest to us after we found a tiny flake of red paint in some hair combings from Rachel's son. And then when Mike Gorm compared the paint flake with the paint on the toolbox, he got a match. Additionally, a layer of metal on one side of the flake was shown to be steel, which is what the toolbox was made of. We were still thinking about the crime scene and whether there was anything that might conceivably provide a link to Napper. One of the things we considered was a couple of footwear marks that had been found in mud on a bridle path close to where Rachel had been attacked. Casts had been made out of the marks at the time, one of which was the heel of a shoe that was similar in style to the heel of a pair of Napper's shoes, but slightly smaller in size. Since the mark was different from the suspected source, we had to find out if there was a good reason, and the only way to do this was to return to the scene, conduct an experiment. Shortly afterwards, Mike and Roy found themselves on Wimbledon Common, looking at what happened when a similar pair of shoes was used to walk over the same area of muddy ground. What they found was that as the wearer of the shoes lifted his foot to take another step, a partial vacuum was created that sucked in the muddy soil around the edges of the shoe. And when they took the plaster-type casts of the marks and compared them with the shoes themselves, they showed that what was left in the mud was a slightly smaller footprint that would normally have been made by a shoe of that size. In the face of what had turned out to be overwhelming evidence, including the DNA, the paint, and the footwear mark, Robert Napper pleaded guilty when the case went to trial. In December 2008, he was convicted of the manslaughter of Rachel Nickell on the grounds of diminished responsibility and sentenced to indefinite incarceration at Broadmoor Hospital. But of course, that's the end of that I was reading you off the website. But it was too late for Jacqueline. wasn't it, and her daughter. It was too late. And also maybe other victims too that we're not aware of properly yet, but I'm going to talk about a possible one later on at the end. So, who was Robert Napper? Let's have a look at a photo of him. I do think if anybody looks, we talk about people looking, like killers. I do think he does, doesn't he? But, what does a killer look like? We've seen killers who look like butter won't melt in their mouths. But what's so frustrating about this particular case is even his own mother had phoned and warned police about him, and I'm going to talk about that in a moment. So, this guy, it's very frustrating because you do really feel, certainly after Rachel's murder, if the police would not have focused so much on Colin Stagg and, looked a bit outwards, is it possible that Jacqueline and her daughter could have been saved? Well, we'll never know, but. So, yes, on 18th of December 2008, he pleaded guilty to Rachel's manslaughter on the grounds of diminished responsibility. So, as I was telling you, he was already detained. I think he'd been there by the time he was. This all came out. I think he'd been in Broadmoor Hospital in Berkshire for 10 years for the double murder in 1993 of Samantha Bisset and her 4-year-old daughter Jazmine. Let's just have another look at Samantha and Jazmine. So now they were killed at their home. It's wondered if he followed them but they lived close by. And it's wondered that maybe he followed them home. He saw them in the park and followed them home. Awful, isn't it? And how strange he did he see single parents, single women with children as some sort of easy target? And was Alex allowed to live because he was a boy? Whereas poor little Jazmine, she was a girl, and unfortunately, anyway, he didn't stop short of killing Jazmine like he did. He did not spare Jazmine, unfortunately, like he spared Alex. And is that because she was a girl? So he had stabbed Samantha Bisset in her neck and chest before assaulting her in an sex way inside her home. She was 27 years old. He smothered her young daughter afterwards, after killing Samantha, he then assaulted her daughter and smothered her, leaving her body surrounded by toys on her bed. He then, a trigger warning here, because he then went even further. He mutilated Samantha's body, and he took parts away with him as trophies. And he created a crime scene that was so grisly, the police photographer assigned to that case had to take 2 years off work after witnessing the scene. He was caught very quickly after that. A fingerprint belonging to him was recovered from the flat. So he was arrested and charged with murdering the Bissets in May 1994. And despite similarities with the murder of Rachel, the police ruled him out as a potential suspect, and instead focused on Colin Stagg, who was innocent. At the time of Samantha's and Jazmine's death, Napper was 40 years old, and he'd been diagnosed as having paranoid schizophrenia and Asperger's syndrome. He had already been held at Broadmoor for more than 10 years. Could their murders have been prevented if the Met Police had not focused so clearly on Colin Stagg? Colin Stagg received a public apology from the Metropolitan Police for their previous involvement and prosecution of him in regard to Rachel's murder investigation. It's been estimated that the pursuit of Colin Stagg cost the public £3 million and that vital scientific information had been missed. So Colin Stagg sued the police for damages totaling £1 million following the 14 months he spent in custody. However, it is alleged that he has blown the lot and he is now working at Tesco. Let's have a look. That's a lot of money to blow, isn't it? So, according to this article by the Daily Mail in 2021, it's nearly 30 years since he was at the centre of one of Scotland Yard's most notorious operations, yet strangers still recognise him, although they can't recall why. I mean, he doesn't look that different, does he? He's got the same face. And he was all over the telly at one point. So he's now 57, greying and portlier than when he hit the headlines in the early 90s. But there's no mistaking his features as he heads to his local Tesco Express for his checkout shift. He was the innocent loner targeted in a police honey trap involving a blonde undercover officer whose mission was to get him to confess to a murder he did not commit. He never admitted killing Rachel Nickell, 23, and there was no worthwhile evidence against him, but police still charged him with her murder. He spent a year in custody awaiting trial before a furious Old Bailey judge threw out the case, branding the undercover operation reprehensible. And later, after a double killer at least, locked up in Broadmoor, emerged as Miss Nickell's real murderer. Mr. Stagg received, well, they're saying £706,000 in compensation from the Home Office for the stigma of still being wrongly considered the prime suspect in the case, and therefore unemployable years after he'd been cleared. Now his story features in a 4-part Channel 4 drama. I don't think I've seen that drama. I'd like to see that. How the undercover Met officer, codenamed Lizzie James, tried to entice him into a confession. And photos from the set of the forthcoming series, My Name is Lizzie, I'm going to look out for that, show the undercover officer stumbling into the sea, her face etched with despair as the emotional strain of the investigation takes its toll. Well, there you go. They're showing exactly where he works there. That seems a bit unfair, unless he was agreeable to that. So, while it's unclear what stage of the inquiry the scenes from the drama reflect, the real-life honey trap officer did pay a heavy price for her involvement. So for 5 months, Lizzie, played by Irish actress Naomi Algar, 28, called and wrote to Mr. Stagg, even dangling the possibility of sex as bait. She took early retirement at the age of 33 and 3 years later was awarded £125,000 compensation after claiming Scotland Yard failed to support her adequately. She has built a new life and her true identity cannot be revealed for legal reasons. Oh, I wonder who she is. She could be doing true crime channels now, couldn't she? Or she could be doing anything. So after a DNA breakthrough, Napa was caught. So he said he had blown much of the money on cars, holidays, clothing. He even paid £850 for a Darth Vader costume. charity donations, flawed business investments. I spent like there was no tomorrow. It's like the lottery winner, isn't it? Spend, spend, spend. And I was earning 2 or 3 grand a month in interest. I was making up for lost time doing the things I should have done in my youth if I hadn't been blighted by Rachel's murder. Today he lives in a semi-detached house in a town in the southeast with his wife, a mother of 4 grown-up children. Oh, well, I'm glad hopefully he's found some happiness. I mean, he didn't do anything wrong. He was just silly, young and silly. It is a 3-minute drive from the Tesco Express store where he works on the tills and as a warehouseman. His colleagues are aware of his history. I mean, he doesn't look any different. You couldn't hide it, really, with the Nickell investigation or the Rachel Nickell investigation. A friend said sometimes customers recognise him and they can't figure out where they've seen him. Anyway, he politely declined to answer questions, apparently. But it seems likely he will speak publicly about his police ordeal and dealings with Lizzie James when the drama is screened later this year. For now, friends say he's simply getting on with his life after being victim of one of Scotland Yard's most disgraceful investigations. As in the more recent shambolic VIP child abuse inquiry at Operation Midland, the presumption of innocence was not adhered to by the police. Some of what remains of his payout is invested in East, as a friend said. And his views on Lizzie James and the force that tried to frame him, he doesn't think much about her, the friend said. He recovered a long time ago. He's one of those people who doesn't look back. Well, I'm glad he seems to be happy. He deserves that because he didn't do anything wrong, as I say, except just be a dafty, really, did he? So I'm glad he seems to have found, some sort of happiness. Now, as far as Rachel's husband, Andre, is concerned, he later wrote a book titled The Last Thursday in July about his life with Rachel, how he's coped with the murder and life with his son afterwards. In 1996, they both moved to France. He said he was driven abroad by media intrusion. He was strongly critical of some of the reporters who tracked him and his son down to sanctuary in the French countryside. However, according to the article I found, he now lives in Spain, in Barcelona, or when this article was written anyway. Now, of course, Alex is a grown man now. So let's have a look. Where is it? Let me just put a couple of windows down and then I can find the article that tells us about. Gosh, put quite a few down. Right. Okay, let me share it with you. So again, I do think hopefully, Rachel's son, and he had his mother taken away from him, and he had a very traumatic event at the age of 2, nearly 3. So Rachel Nickell's son, that's what I remember most, the moment I knew she was gone. Aged nearly 3, Alec Hanscom saw his mother, Rachel Nickell, murdered in front of him. It was a case that shocked the nation. Anna Moore meets him and his father, Andre, and finds after 25 years they have a remarkable bond. Oh, they're very alike, aren't they? So yeah, a young mother ambling across Wimbledon Common with her dog and her young son on a perfect July morning in 1992. A frenzied attack from an unknown assailant assailant, a media circus, a botched police investigation. So this was one of the most high-profile crimes of the last few decades. Her name, for those of you that are younger that won't remember it, but those of you who are like either my age or not much younger than me, of the age when this, that you will remember it, you can't forget it. I mean, her face was all over the TV. It was one of those cases that everybody knew about. However, the names and faces of her young son who witnessed the attack, Alex and Andre, and her partner, are probably less familiar, which is what they wanted. Unable to live in the spotlight, they left the UK just months later to begin again. I think they were planning on leaving the UK anyway. It's a shame they didn't leave just a bit sooner. Now, 25 years later, side by side in a hotel bar in sunny Barcelona, smiling, relaxed, this tight father and son team sings a kind of miracle. Alex, 27, has written his own account of his mother's murder, its impact and aftermath. It's as he remembers it through the eyes of a child. Though he was just 3 weeks short of his 3rd birthday when it happened, he was able to provide police with a strikingly accurate account of the attack and the attacker, and it remains crystal clear in his mind. So at the time, Rachel she was 23, she lived in Balham, South London, with Andre, Alex and their dog Molly. She called them her little pack. She had met Andre at a swimming pool when she was just 19, lifeguarding. A former grammar school girl, Rachel was studying English literature at university. Andre was a semi-professional tennis player. After their first date, Rachel phoned her mum to say she had found the man of her life. Within months, she was pregnant, had quit her studies, and moved into Andre's flat. He'd started work as a motorcycle courier to make ends meet. The plan was to sell up, leave the UK and live somewhere rural. France was top of the list. I remember waking up on the morning it happened, waving goodbye to my father, watching him fire up his bike for work, says Alex. The journey across town to the Common has kind of disappeared, but I remember walking along the path in the woodland. Suddenly, a man appeared from nowhere. Alex later described him to police. His loping walk, his strange blank face, his black bag, white shirt. He threw Alex to the ground, and by the time he had recovered himself, the man was down at the stream, washing his hands before lurching away. Rachel, who'd been stabbed more than 40 times, lay utterly still. It's not like it happens in the movies, said Alex. It was so quick, and everything was so silent. There was this strange polarity, even though it was hectic and violent, and there was blood. At the same time, there was this big feeling of peace and tranquility. To me, my mother just looked like she was lying there, ready to wake any moment, like in the imaginary games we used to play. Alex asked her repeatedly to get up, but Rachel didn't respond. That's what I remember most, said Alex. The particular moment I knew she was gone, that feeling of losing someone you love, how everything can change in a matter of seconds. I tell you, that's it, isn't it? How often do we say that? You just never know the minute. You've got to make the most of every moment. Now, luckily, it sounds like they were happy. They were a happy family. I'm glad she had some happiness. It seems extraordinary that Alex never asked for Rachel again, or wanted an explanation for where she was or what happened. In his little world, he'd already formed an understanding of death. The family had recently rescued a bird with a broken wing, which thrived for a while and then died. Oh, tell me about it. They had buried it on Wimbledon Common. Oh. And Rachel had explained he didn't need his body anymore. The part that was really him had gone somewhere else. Oh my goodness, gosh, sorry, I'll try not to cry. Alex had also been transfixed by the children's film, The Land Before Time, just days before the attack, where the mummy dinosaur dies in an earthquake and the baby pleads for her to get up before carrying on without her. This is odd because last night, this is an odd coincidence. Last night I was watching one of the Jurassic Park films, and it was the last one, I think, and there's a part where there's a brontosaurus on the Isla Nebula, as the islands fall into bits, and it's crying. And I started talking about it with my son, and he said he'd seen this thing where there was a brontosaurus cuddling her baby as the meteor attack happened that wiped out the dinosaur, and saying, just look at me, just look at me. And I was crying like a baby. I thought, gosh, I'm crying at a film that's not even real. It's about dinosaurs and about what my son had told me about something he'd seen that was about dinosaurs and wasn't real. And now, and it's so strange then to be reading this, because it's like a coincidence almost. Anyway, there you go. You just, life's full of strange coincidences. So where the mummy dinosaur dies in an earthquake and the baby pleads for her to get up before carrying on without her. Gosh, it reminds me of Bambi as well, isn't it? Oh dear, this poor boy. But, he seems to have, he's come through it, or I would imagine Rachel had been looking after him all his life. On the common, the alarm was raised and an ambulance called, and Alex sedated. From the moment Andre collected him from the hospital, Alex transferred all his needs, his love and his emotion to his father. When Alex woke next morning, he asked immediately for Daddy. Until that day, it had been Mummy every time. In the following weeks, Alex would not let Andre out of his sight. It's impossible to imagine how Andre functioned, raw with shock, deep in grief, the focus of a media frenzy, and sole protector of a traumatized child, who was also the only witness to the murder, the best possible source for leads. It was mind-bending the whole time, says Andre, and there wasn't anybody I could go to for help, because it was one of those extreme experiences that very few people had encountered. Rachel was his reference point. We'd had a fairly normal dynamic, he says. I went to work. Rachel was at home with Alex. The two were a unit, a circle, and I was on the outside controlling the perimeter. I didn't take in all the details of Alex's day because it wasn't my responsibility. But normality for a 3-year-old means getting the toast right, the showers at the right time, the juice in the right cup. For every decision I made, from the most unimaginably trivial, I'd ask myself, what would Rachel have wanted? And because I knew her so well, because we had that connection, that's what I leant on. That and Alex himself. The fact that he'd switched all his passion and attention to me was overwhelming, but also a massive aid, says Andre. It was soothing, a balm. That love and affection keeps you afloat. From the outside, the decision to leave, 5 months later, just the two of them and Molly the dog, they took the dog, seems extreme. Their first stop was the south of France, where they rented a remote farm building near Montpellier. 3 years later, they crossed over to Spain, settling in the Catalan countryside where Andre coached tennis. They told no one about their past. Starting over was, says Andre, a nightmare, but the alternative was worse. Normal life in the UK had seemed impossible, unreachable. The press had followed Alex to nursery. God, they are absolute twats, the mainstream media. Always complaining about the social media. And this is what they're like. The police had wired their home in case Alex revealed a crucial detail. They had been taken to grueling sessions with a child psychologist, which felt all wrong. All the time you see the headlines, you hear the whispers. Everyone's watching Alex, saying he'll never recover, says Andre. I just felt it was impossible for a child to grow up like that. Rachel and I were always going to leave the country. Again, it was being true to her values. Rachel's parents were devastated by the departure, describing it as a second bereavement. However, their relationship with Alex continued, with Alex visiting until the age of 8, when contact ceased. I wonder why. They have apparently corresponded more recently. According to Andre, this was never intended. Rachel's parents had already lost enough, he says. For years, he said, life was a fog. He battled waves of grief and was often absorbed by the murder and all he had lost. There were times when all I thought about was revenge. Alex never asked about the case or what had happened to the bad man. But Rachel's presence remained close. She was a natural part of the day, says Andre. Alex might draw a picture and say, Mummy would have liked that. He had the scent she wore in his drawer with his favourite things, and he'd get that out. I could see him connecting with the memories, getting comfort from that. By day, he seemed to be recovering well. He ran wild with the bikes and the dog. He quickly made friends. He was sociable, no signs of fear. But nights told another story. His nightmares had started very shortly after the attack and went on for years. He'd make these terrible alien sounds of distress. He was catatonic. His eyes were open, and I couldn't reach him. Oh dear. The relief over time was seeing them dropping in intensity, becoming more spread out. There was improvement, there was hope. Neither had therapy, no one supported them. Andre thought of turning to a local priest, but in the end he realised day by day just getting by, living life was their recovery. Inevitably there were tensions. All the pressures on my father, having to make so many decisions, being isolated. Sooner or later, the tensions were directed at each other. We had lots of fights, and that really reached boiling point in my teenage years. Well, teenagers, oh my God, it's bad enough, without that to have to contend with. Andre agrees. We were at war, 2 males, big personalities, me setting boundaries and him trying to break them. It was only after Alex left home to study music in London that their relationship recovered. Andre recalls the turning point. Teenage kids phone home for a reason to send money. We had the usual conversation about resources, but then Alex didn't end the call. He wasn't running away to do something else. He started asking me, how are you? He was sensitive. There was so much emotional intelligence. I put the phone down and I thought, I'm dealing with a grown-up. It talks about Napa. I'd been very angry for a long time, says Andre, but reading the psychiatric report and seeing what Robert Napa had been through, he'd had a violent home life. He'd been sexually abused. I'd always told Alex that nobody is better than anybody else. You have to try and understand why they do things. Forgiveness is a process. And over the years, almost without knowing it, I'd been through mine and Alex had been through his. Andre also wrote a letter of apology to Colin Stagg for publicly pointing the finger towards him. As a parent, you have to set an example. He says, I can't expect Alex to behave in a certain way if I wasn't prepared to do it. I made a mistake. Based on information from reliable sources, I helped put a spotlight on him, which made his life worse. A few years later, Alex and Andre decided to go travelling together. It was a completely different dynamic by then, both adults, no obligation. We closed everything down, gave away what we couldn't sell, and then spent 4 years on the road: India, Egypt, Thailand, Indonesia, Sri Lanka. And that's where Alex's book began. Though there have been other relationships, Andre is single, and he and Alex now live in Barcelona. He sees Rachel in his son every day, her sharpness of intelligence, her wicked sense of fun, and her movements too. Rachel was tall and elegant, a dancer. Alex has that same elegance. You see it in his gestures, his eyes, his presence. Nobody does everything right. And I don't know how I did anything. Looking back on it, Andre continues, it's been a marathon. But I can look at Alex now and think, I'm in clear water. Mission accomplished. Alex got me through it, and Rachel. Gosh, so that's the book. Alex's book sounds like it'd be very interesting to read. Letting Go, a true story of murder, loss and survival by Alex Hanscom, by HarperCollins, published by HarperCollins. Now, let's go to the errors by the police. According to Wikipedia, following an investigation, the report was published by the Independent Police Complaints Commission. We know about them, don't we? And it said they described their handling of the investigation as a catalogue of bad decisions and errors, which had resulted in Napa being free to kill Rachel. Officers missed a series of opportunities to take him off the streets and suggested that the lives of Samantha Bisset and her 4-year-old daughter Jazmine could also have been saved. There was a report in 1989 that he attacked a woman on Plumstead Heath. No record of the telephone call can be found. So they said that it's clear through the investigations into the Green Chain rapes and Rachel Nickell's death, there was a catalogue of bad decisions and errors made by the police. They failed to sufficiently investigate after his mother had phoned police to report they had confessed to her that he had raped a woman, and they eliminated him from their inquiries into the Green Chain rapes because he was over 6 foot tall. So without these errors, Robert Napa could have been off the streets before he killed Rachel and the Bissets, and before numerous women suffered violent sexual attacks at his hands. Detectives had decided to exclude anyone over 6 feet based on the description of a 5'7" rapist. However, there were conflicting witness reports of his height, and he walked with a stoop. And the IPCC said no police officer would face disciplinary action because they had all retired and one key detective had died. Criminal prosecutions were not considered. Just awful. So let's see that I've got these were supposed to be. So these are the 7 missed chances. This was, I think it was from the Mirror or the Sun. So in October 1989, he tells his mother he has raped a woman. She calls police about the attack 2 months earlier in Plumstead, where he leaves traces of DNA. She says it was on the Common when in fact it was in a house. Police check shows no attacks on the Common, and Napa is never interviewed. No DNA sample taken. Now, I would suggest that if a mother phones to say her son's confessed to rape, you've got to take that pretty seriously. In 1992, in 4 months, he attempts to rape 2 women and rapes another. By the time an EFIT is issued in August, he has already killed Rachel. A neighbour calls police to say he matches the rapist's description. Police arrange for him to give a sample of saliva and blood, but he doesn't turn up. He also misses a second appointment, but police do nothing. Number 3, that year another caller identifies the rapist as Bob Napper, but he's eliminated from the investigation as he's over 6 foot. Even though one of the victims initially tells police her attacker was 6'3". Number 4, they arrest Napper for possession of a firearm and ammunition without a certificate. They discover an A to Z map of his home marked with the locations of some of the rapes. However, Napper is just prosecuted for the firearm offence. For fuck's sake. Number 5, in early 1993, he is stopped by police after being seen climbing the wall of a young mother's home. He persuaded them he'd been out for a walk. What, over a wall? Number 6, a tin containing a gun is found on Wimbledon Common in Plumstead. His fingerprints are on it, but police do nothing. In that November that same year, he kills Samantha Bisset and her daughter Jazmine. And number 7, a sample taken from Rachel Nickell is returned by the analysts at the Forensic Science Service in 2001 with no DNA match. In fact, the test is faulty, and only 3 years later, when it's retested, is the link with Napper finally established. Robert Napper. So this is him when he was a child. He looks so sort of insignificant, timid, doesn't he? You know, you just think they all start off like this. Seems like he was probably loved. Though it said earlier that he was sexually abused. I don't know too much about his childhood, about what his father was like. He seemed close to his mother, if he was close enough to actually ring her and tell her that he had RAPE'd somebody. But always amazing, you know, when you see these killers, monsters, as children. You know, he might be schizophrenic and he might have Asperger's, but plenty of people have that. Don't go and do what he did. You know, he's obviously seriously mentally disturbed, but they all start off like this, innocent children. Everybody's a child at some point. Now, I think I've got one more thing to show you. Was he responsible for the murder of Claire Tiltman? Now, this is another famous case, if you like, that I remember from my youth, because I remember Claire's face being, you know, on the TV, and I was probably a similar age, and I felt an affinity with her. She was knifed more than 40 times in an alley in Kent as she took a short cut to visit friends on 18th of January 1993, and her killer has not been found. So it's possible. It's possible. I think I need to do a video on that case as well. Because he'd done by that he was a peeping Tom. He had an arsenal of weapons. He admitted to rape a 17-year-old he'd followed. You know, he's got so many different. There's Samantha and Rachel again. So this police officer thinks that he may be connected, but I need to look at that in a separate video. Poor Claire. You'd think he'd confess to it, though, because he is confessing now. I mean, he's not coming out, whatever, but he hasn't confessed to this, I don't think. So, DNA advances mean that hopefully, you know, that awful miscarriage of justice against Colin can't happen again. But he at least seems to have rebuilt his life. Because even worse are those brutal murders and rapes of women and children. They could have been prevented, but, you know, there's nothing to be done about that now. But God willing, the miracle of DNA, and DNA is a miracle. It is a game changer. There'll be a lot of killers out there that'll be really sort of, waiting for the knock on the door, because now we've got the filial DNA as well. They can trace from people's families. They don't even need your own DNA. People are getting caught because the genealogical DNA, people are sending their DNA to genealogy websites, aren't they, and things to find out about their history, and they're getting matched up, and if they hit with a murderer or something. So this is a miracle of DNA, and I'm sure there'll be lots more killers to be caught with DNA as time goes on. And let's hope, is it the end of the serial killer or even the serial rapist, because they do tend to get caught quite quickly with DNA, don't they? Okay, so that, of course, is a very sad story of Rachel, but I'm glad there's some positivity that Alex seems to have, Alex and his father seem to have, Andre seems to have, coped. I'm sure they still miss Rachel even to this day, but at least they've coped. Colin Stagg seems to, although he might be working in Tesco Express's worst jobs, at least he's, made some sort of life for himself as well. And Robert Napper is exactly where he belongs, in a high security prison or a hospital where he will never be released from. But it's quite scary, isn't it? Because when they arrested Colin and were determined it was Colin, I bet a lot of people breathed a sigh of relief, and they were not safe. Anyway, okay, so that's it. So I will, as always, see you really soon in the next video. Thank you for watching. Please remember to like, and if you're not subscribed, maybe you'll consider subscribing. I'll be back really soon in the next video, and until then, as always, may your God go with you. And rest in peace, Rachel. In fact, I think I'm going to put Rachel's picture up, play out with a bit of music. Hi. Bye.